Hi, so today I'm going to talk about types of metadata. So in the first lecture on metadata, we looked at the role of metadata. So I'll just now, after giving a very different perspective on metadata, I'll start with types of metadata. And types of metadata are basically there are many types of classifications for the metadata, but what we are going to do is we are going to do it on the basis of two types, or two. We are going to look at two classifications. One is on the basis of the functional areas of the data warehouse, and second is on the basis of the type of whether it is used by the business users or it is used by the technical or IT staff. So let me begin today's lecture. So presentation is based on two sources. One is chapter 9 of the textbook that we are using, the Paulraj Punia book. Okay, and second is the Kimball's Life Cycle Toolkit book, second edition. So as I was telling you that types of metadata, so there is data acquisition, data storage, and information delivery. So as you can see, every process in the data warehouse can be linked to these three functional areas of the data warehouse. And another classification is on the type of users, so it is business and technical. So again, some recap of what metadata is, and I've tried to put some more information about metadata that you would want to know. So there are different kinds of names that are given to metadata. So it is data about the data, it is table of contents of data, catalog for the data, data warehouse atlas, data warehouse roadmap, data warehouse directory, glue that holds the data warehouse together, tongs to handle the data, and the nerve center. So these are different kinds of names or aliases that have been given to the metadata in the literature. So the nerve center actually is a good kind of name that is given to metadata, and it highlights the importance of metadata in data warehousing. So this is one definition that I came across in the Kimball's book, and it kind of looks comprehensive to me. So it is all the information that defines and describes the structures, operations, and contents of a data warehouse system. So you can take this definition as the standard kind of definition. And this figure basically tells you that how data warehouse metadata works as a nerve center. Right, so you can see that there is a kind of interface with everything that we do in data warehousing, whether it is extraction, cleansing, transformation, loading, whether it is internal source systems or the external data, whether it's the query tools or the reporting tools or OLAP tools, or whether it is some kind of applications or data mining, anything that we are doing, metadata is present, or the role of metadata is present in some way or the other. And this is another way of looking at it. So in the boxes that you see, the dark gray boxes, that is the process. So it is process related metadata, and the associated metadata is in the capsule in the light gray capsules, right? So this again gives you a very high level description of the metadata. So it is linked with every process that is carried out in the data warehouse. It's a source system, source data structure definition, then data extraction, then initial formatting or reformatting, merging, then cleansing, then transformations and consolidations, validity checks, then structure definitions. So here basically you do the model and then you finally load. So this is kind of a process that takes the data into the data warehouse. So you can see that with every step, with every process, there is an associated metadata. So, and here I'm trying to give you some information about the kind of metadata that could be stored in a system where customer is a table or an entity. So you can see that there are lots of things that we actually store in this in the metadata for the entities, like alias name. So customer is the entity name. Then there are alias names like account or client, right? And then there's a definition. So a person or an organization that purchases goods or services from the company. Remarks, regular, current and past customers. Source systems. So there are two sources for this, finished goods orders and maintenance contracts. Create, date of creation is also stored. Last update date was also stored. And update cycle is also recorded. And last full refresh cycle was on December 29th. Full refresh cycle is every 6 months. So the next right, and data quality review was done on this date. Planned archival is every 6 months, and responsible user for this particular entity is ABC. So this kind of metadata you can typically find in the data warehouse for entities like customer. So metadata classification. So now let us come and talk about the first kind of classification of metadata, and this is by based on the functional areas of the data warehouse. And you can see data acquisition, data storage and information delivery, and every data warehouse process occurs in one of these three areas. So it covers the entire data warehousing. So first comes the data acquisition. So in this area, the data warehouse processes relate to the following functions: data extraction, transformation, cleansing, integration, and other pre-processing that happens. And this is how it looks like. So metadata types are like source system platforms, source system logical models, source system physical models. I hope you understand the logical and the physical models. Source structure definitions, data extraction methods, transformation rules, cleansing rules, summarization rules if there is a need for summarization. So typically when we are using a bottom-up approach, like using data marts or supermarts, then we definitely try to look at do some kind of summarization. Then target logical model, target physical model. Typically we are looking at star schemas, right, and their variants. Data structures in the staging area, source to target relationship, external data structures, and external data definitions. So all these things you can see are recorded, right? So now I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this metadata. So development tools are used to record this metadata. So development tools which for using which you acquire the data. Other tools used in the area or in some other area may also use the metadata recorded by tools in this area. For example, say when a query tool is used to create standard queries, you will be using metadata recorded by processes in the data acquisition area, right? And of course it comes in the queries come in the information delivery area. So the query tool is meant for a process in the information delivery area. So queries which are part of the information delivery area can also access metadata metadata recorded during data acquisition. And it is used for administering and monitoring the ongoing functions of a data warehouse. So it is basically used for monitoring ongoing extraction and transformations. Ongoing load images are created properly using data acquisition metadata. And it is used by users to find data sources for the data elements in his or her queries. So this is again important. So I want to, before I run a query and whatever data elements I need in that query, I may want to go and look at the sources of those data elements. Then the next part is the data storage. So in this area, the data warehouse process relate to the following functions: data loading, archiving and management. And this is how it looks like. So data storage processes like load image creation, data loading, data archiving, data management. And you can see, again, you can see what all things are being stored: source logical models, source physical models, target logical, target physical, source to target mapping, key restructuring, data application methods, initial load procedures and statistics, right? Incremental load procedures which are done during the refresh, rules for handling load exceptions, data archival rules, storage allocations, backup recovery procedures, and database fine-tuning stats. So stats which are used, statistics which are used to fine-tune the database. So all these are part of the data storage. So let me now give you some more details about this. So the tools record the metadata elements using the development during development phase, as well as while the data warehouse is in operation after development. So during development and deployment, and even after deployment, metadata is continuously collected. So metadata used in this or collected in this area is used for development, administration, and by the users. Users, when I say the end users, right? So used for full data refreshes and incremental data loads. And DBA will use for processes of recovery, backup, and tuning, for purging and archiving of data, right? And user wanting to do, say for example, how users would use it. So the first 3 points are mainly related to development and administration. The fourth and the last bullet is corresponding to user. So user wanting to do a drill down from total quarterly sales to sales districts, right? So I have a total quarterly sale value, and I want to drill it down to the sales districts, right? And so I would want to know about when was the last time the data on district delineation was loaded, right? So I would want to know this particular information, and this particular information would be there in the metadata. Now comes the information delivery. So in this area, the data warehouse processes relate to the following functions: report generation, query processing, and any kind of complex analysis that I want to do in the data warehouse. And this is basically the information delivery process report. So all the three things are mentioned in the box above, and the metadata types are here. So you can see here that you have source systems, source data definitions, source structure definitions, and you can see that along these different types of databases, different types of metadata, you can see some of the things are common. So it is very important that the metadata is integrated over all these functional areas, and there is no duplication, because metadata also needs to be updated from time to time, and if there is duplication in the metadata, right, so you'll have to spend or you'll have to more overheads would be involved in updating the databases at all the places, right? So any kind of duplication must be taken care of, and as far as possible try to maintain a single version, or say a single have a single repository for the metadata, right? And this is one of the challenges in designing a solution for metadata, right? So these are the things that are there. So query templates, pre-formatted reports. So we basically talk about canned queries and reports, right? So metadata corresponding to that would be there, and then there'll be something about OLAP content. So these are the things that we typically store in the metadata for information delivery. And most of the processes are meant for end users, and while using the process, end users generally use metadata recorded in processes of the other two areas of data acquisition and data storage. So I have already given you example earlier that query related metadata can be when a user issues a query, so he may want to access the sources of data elements that are part of the query. So when a user creates a query with the aid of a query processing tool, he or she can refer back to the metadata recorded in the data acquisition and data storage areas. So can look up the source data configurations, data structures, and data transformations from the data acquisition metadata, and can look up date of last full refresh and the incremental loads for various tables from the data storage area metadata. So these are specific examples that a user who's trying to do some analysis on the data warehouse can access data belonging to the other two functional areas. And it mostly contains metadata corresponding to predefined queries, predefined reports. That's what canned queries and reports, input parameter definitions for queries and reports, and information that might be required by the OLAP tool. Now with this, let me now come to the next classification of metadata. So it is basically done it is basically done for business users and for technical users, right? So there is something called as business metadata, and there's something called as IT or technical metadata. So business metadata describes the content of the data warehouse in more user accessible terms, or you can say in more simpler terms. So what data you have, where from it came, what it means, and its relationship with other data in the data warehouse. And it contains display name and content description fields, and it often serves as a documentation for the data warehouse and may include additional layers of categorization that simplifies users' view. Say what typically is done, subsets of tables into business process oriented groups. So I put some tables into related to one business process in one group, and so on, and grouping related columns in a dimension table. That is also done. And most BI tools, the metadata models in most BI tools provide these kinds of groupings. And when users browse the metadata to see what is there in the data warehouse, they are primarily viewing the business metadata. So you can say the most simple and the first metadata that anybody would want to look at would be the business metadata. And it is less structured than technical data. As I said, it's like a documentation, and originates from textual documents, spreadsheets, and even from business rules and policies that are not written down completely. And most business users do not have technical skills to create their own queries or format their own reports, and are interested in canned queries and reports, right? So the metadata related to canned queries and reports is also kept here, and cryptic names are not preferred. So rather we name the data elements in such a way that they are understood by the business users very clearly. And examples of business metadata, it could talk about connectivity procedures, like if your database server is somewhere else, so how do you connect to that? Security and access privileges, the overall structure of data in business terms, source systems, source to target mappings, data transformation business rules, summarizations and derivations, table names and business definitions, attribute names and business definitions. So all these are part of business metadata, and there are some other details also that are captured: data ownership, query and reporting tools, predefined queries, reports, report distribution information, like if a particular report is generated, who all would have access to that, common information access routes, rules for rules for analysis using OLAP, currency of OLAP data, data warehouse refresh schedule. So all this are captured in the business metadata. And if you see, like, there will be overlap with multiple functional areas metadata that we discussed earlier, right? So that is very common. So this is another, as I said, it's another kind of classification of metadata, and it would have significant overlap with the other functional area metadata that we just discussed. And it is not that you would have two kinds of metadata in the warehouse, one related to one classification and the other related to other classification. Basically what happens is that the metadata is there is a single repository of metadata, and then according to your requirement you label them either as business metadata or technical metadata, or data acquisition metadata, data storage metadata, or information delivery metadata. Excuse me. So a representative list of questions. So what I've done is I have listed them down so that you can know what information exists in the metadata. So how can I sign on to the connection with the data warehouse? So that is what about the connectivity information that was there in the previous slide. So which parts of the data warehouse can I access? This is about the accessibility, like what access privileges a particular user has. Can I see all the attributes from a specific table? This is again access and security. So what are the definitions of the attributes I need in my query? So I can go back and look at attribute definitions and their business meanings. Are there any queries and reports already predefined to give the results I need? So I may want to look at the predefined queries and the predefined reports, so that I don't have to write the queries again and generate the reports again, right? Or write the code for generating the reports. So what default values were used for the data items retrieved by my query? So all this information I can get from the business metadata, and this continues. So what kind of aggregations are available for the metrics used? How is the value of the data item I need derived from other data items? So like this, there are so many questions that anybody can ask from the business metadata, and the community that benefits from the business metadata are the managers, business analysts, power users, regular users, casual users, senior managers, and junior executives. So all these are like kind of people who stand to or who access this particular business metadata. And when I look at the technical metadata, you will see that the same that the persons who benefit are quite different from what is listed here. So now let me come to the technical metadata. That is the second second kind of metadata that we collect. So it defines the objects and processes that make up the data warehouse system from a technical perspective. So it talks about system metadata, it talks about ETL process metadata, it talks about front room metadata. So let us see what these are, right, and what kind of information is stored. So defines data. So if I come to systems metadata, so it basically defines the data structures. Then it also defines the tables, the fields, the indexes, and partitions that are there. And this is especially relevant when you talk about an RDBMS. What are the databases, dimensions, and measures? So dimensions and measures are nothing but facts. In the ETL process, it talks about source and target for a particular task, and the transformations and the frequency. Then we come to the front end or the front room. So it defines the data model, like how do the users see the data, whether it is a star schema or something similar data model or some different data model, right? So some technical metadata elements are useful for the business users, like table and column names. So table and column names, like fields, are actually used in this, are captured in this, so that information can be used to business metadata users or the business users in general. And again, the technical metadata collects information about so many things: data models, record layouts, source to staging area mapping, staging area to data warehouse mapping, because as you know that during the staging area we may not want to put them in a very structured manner. So there is a source to staging area mapping, data extraction rules, data transformation rules, data aggregation rules, cleansing, and now you can see that there is a significant overlap with the data storage, data acquisition metadata that we talked about. Summarizations, then data loading and refresh schedules, job dependencies, program names and descriptions, data warehouse data model, and the database names. So all this comes under the technical metadata. And along with that, we also talk about table and view names, column names, and like this, so connectivity data. So all these things come under the technical metadata as well. So quite a bit of overlap there with the business metadata as well. So now again, what kind of questions I can ask? So what databases and tables exist? What are the columns, indexes, keys and indexes? What are the physical files? Last update was when was the last successful update? What are the transformation rules? So all this comes under the technical metadata, and there's a whole lot of things. So some of them would have would be would be same as that we capture in the business metadata. So the main thing is that anybody can access the business metadata as well as the technical metadata, depending upon how comfortable or how computer literate this person is, right? So you can see that the people who typically use this metadata are project managers, DBA, the data warehouse administrator, the metadata manager, the architect, right, the developer, the business analyst, the data modeler, the security architect. So all this would use the technical metadata, right? So from this discussion we can see that you can classify the metadata according to your requirements, and you can give access to any kind of metadata to any kind of user, right? Because you may have a business user who's very computer literate, who's highly technically skilled. So there is no harm in giving him access to the technical metadata. So there are no hard and fast rules that only these users can see this metadata and these users can see only this part of the metadata. So there should not be any such restrictions. Of course, there would be restrictions in terms of access and privileges. So if you do not have the access or privilege to see a part of data or say part of the data, then you will not be allowed to see the metadata of that piece of data, irrespective of which type of metadata you are interested in. So you will not have access to any kind of metadata for data elements which you cannot access. So in the next lecture I will wind up this module, and I'm going to basically talk about design and implementation of metadata. So here I'm going to basically talk about what kind of solutions are existing in the market or in the literature, and what kind of issues that we face when we start talking about metadata for a data warehouse project, right? So integration of metadata that is coming out of different processes and coming out of different functional areas of a data warehouse is a challenge. So I'm going to talk mainly about that. Thank you.